It was supposed to be the perfect homecoming. Sarah Miller had spent 3 long days away from her husband, John, at a corporate retreat. The retreat was supposed to help her reconnect with her colleagues, build trust through ridiculous team-building exercises, and refresh her mind for the upcoming months. But as she opened the front door to her house, that sense of tranquility she had hoped for quickly dissipated. The silence was overwhelming, unnatural. It wrapped around her like a heavy fog, whispering that something was wrong. She froze in the doorway for a moment, staring at the disarray in front of her. Furniture was overturned, papers were scattered across the floor, and the faint smell of something stale lingered in the air. Everything that was once orderly and peaceful in her home had been destroyed. Yet it wasn't the chaos that made her heart race. It was the absence of something. She stepped inside, slowly, with caution, trying to make sense of the situation. The living room was a mess, but her eyes immediately darted toward the corner where the safe had been. It was open. The combination to the safe was something only a few people knew, including Sarah herself. Her first thought was John. Had he left it open? She quickly dismissed the idea. John wouldn't do something like that. He had always been careful, especially about the things that mattered to her. Her gaze flicked to the desk where the pile of family photos usually sat. The photos of her and John's wedding day, the photo of her grandmother holding a young Sarah in her arms, smiling in a time long past. But none of these were where they belonged. They were all turned face down. Someone had gone through them. But why? Sarah's fingers trembled as she pulled out her phone and called John. 1 ring, 2 rings, the familiar click of voicemail. She cursed under her breath. Her stomach churned with unease. "John, it's me. Someone broke into the house," she said, her voice unsteady. "The safe's open, and I'm not sure what they took yet, but call me back immediately." Her heart pounded in her chest. She walked through the wreckage of her living room, mentally tallying the damages. The couch cushions had been slashed open, their contents spilled out across the floor, like someone had been searching for something. The drawers had been pulled out and emptied. Nothing of value seemed to be gone. No money, no jewelry. But the letters, her grandmother's letters, the ones she had kept for years, were missing. "Not again," she muttered to herself, walking to the kitchen. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She had warned herself to be cautious around certain people, to not let her guard down with them. But this felt like something much worse. The phone buzzed in her hand, and she almost jumped out of her skin. It wasn't John. It was Evan, a colleague from work. "How was the drive back?" he asked, his voice light and friendly. She bit her lip. "Someone broke into my house, Evan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The safe's open. They knew the combination. They took something important." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Evan's voice softened. "Jesus, Sarah, are you okay? Do you want me to come over?" "No," she snapped, frustration boiling inside her. She had no time for comforting words. "I know exactly who did this." She glanced around the room again, taking in the wreckage. She couldn't believe it. Meredith, her mother-in-law, the one person who had always made her life miserable with her passive-aggressive comments and controlling behavior. She was behind this. It had to be her. "Meredith," Sarah muttered under her breath, as if the name alone could summon the woman into the room. The thought of Meredith's sharp, calculating eyes made Sarah's blood run cold. Meredith had been after those letters for months. Evan's voice broke through her thoughts. "Wait, Sarah, who's Meredith? And why would she do this?" Sarah sighed deeply, her hand clutching the edge of the kitchen counter as she sank down onto the stool. "Meredith is John's mother. She's convinced that my grandmother's letters are proof of some family wrongdoings from decades ago. Some real estate dispute that it doesn't even make sense." Evan was quiet for a moment, processing what she said. "I know this sounds crazy, but you need to report this to the police." She shook her head, her mind racing. "I can't," she said bitterly. "What would I say?" My mother-in-law used a key to break into my house and steal documents because she's bitter about some family drama? They won't believe me. They'll take her side. She's too smart for that. The basement door creaked open slightly, catching her eye. She hadn't checked it yet. Her heart skipped a beat. Maybe there was something down there that would explain what had happened. I have to go, she said abruptly, cutting Evan off before he could respond. I'll call you back. She hung up the phone and made her way toward the basement, the light flickering on as she stepped down the stairs. Each creak of the old wooden steps seemed to echo in the silence, reminding her of how fragile everything had become. She reached the bottom of the stairs and flicked on the basement light. It wasn't much better than the rest of the house. Chaos everywhere. But something caught her eye. A small piece of paper wedged under a fallen box. She bent down and grabbed it, her heart racing. It was a receipt from a hardware store, dated 3 days ago. A duplicate key, she whispered to herself, her hands trembling as she read the fine print. A key had been made, and it wasn't for her. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was John. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice tense, full of concern. "I'm at my mom's." "Willow, listen, I can explain." "Did you give her a key?" Sarah demanded, cutting him off. Her voice was sharp now, the anger creeping into her words. There was silence on the other end of the line. "John," she said, her voice low, her heart sinking. "Did you give her a key to our house?" John's voice came through, soft, unsure. "She just wanted to look for some old family photos while you were away. I didn't think—" "Of course you didn't," Sarah snapped, her patience running thin. "Because you never do think when it comes to her, do you?" She crushed the receipt in her hand. "Those letters. They were all I had left of my grandmother. The only things that were truly mine. I didn't mean for this to happen." John's voice softened. "But it didn't matter anymore. Not after everything." "No," Sarah said, her voice cold. "We're done talking. I'm coming over there right now. And John, tell your mother to prepare for war." She ended the call, standing in the middle of the ruined basement. Her fingers gripped the phone tightly as her mind raced. Meredith had crossed a line. This wasn't just about family drama anymore. It was about control. And Sarah was done being the victim. Sarah's hands shook as she stepped outside, the night air cold against her skin, but it was nothing compared to the chill that had settled in her heart. She slammed the car door shut with a force that seemed to echo through the empty streets of their suburban neighborhood. The headlights illuminated the perfectly manicured lawns, the peaceful homes all lined up neatly, just like the perfect life she had imagined for herself and John. But that life was now gone. It had been taken from her piece by piece, each betrayal more painful than the last. As she pulled away from the house, she could feel the weight of the keys in her pocket, the keys to the kingdom that John had so casually handed over to his mother. They weren't just keys to a house, they were keys to the destruction of everything she had worked so hard to build. Sarah's mind raced as she sped down the road, heading to Meredith's house. She had been here before, countless times, always smiling, always pretending. But today, there would be no smiles, no pretenses. Today, she was taking back control. She wasn't sure what she expected when she confronted Meredith, but she knew one thing for sure. The calm, measured Sarah that had always tried to be patient and understanding was no longer who she was. The person in her rearview mirror was someone else, someone who had been pushed too far. As Sarah pulled into the driveway of Meredith's sprawling home, she noticed how different it felt now. This was the same house she had visited for family dinners, holidays, even a few casual get-togethers. But now it looked foreign, cold, clinical. The front door was already open, and she saw Meredith standing in the foyer, arms crossed, a glass of wine in hand, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had known this moment would come. Sarah had never fully trusted her, but now the realization hit her like a slap in the face. Meredith had been playing a game from the very beginning, a game that Sarah had unknowingly been part of. "Sarah," Meredith said, her voice sweet but laced with a hidden malice. "I was wondering when you'd finally come. To what do I owe the pleasure?" She took a deliberate sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "You know exactly why I'm here," Sarah replied, her voice firm but trembling with a quiet rage. She couldn't hold back any longer. "You took something from me, Meredith. You stole from me." Her words felt foreign in her own mouth, but they rang true. Meredith's expression flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough for Sarah to see. The mask had slipped. For a second, she saw the woman who had always been hiding behind a perfect facade, the woman who had tried to control everything around her, including Sarah's life. "Oh, darling," Meredith said, her voice dropping to a mockingly sweet tone. "What are you talking about? I haven't stolen anything from you. Everything I did for John. You know how much I care for him." She stepped closer, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor with each step. "You know how much I care for our family." Sarah's jaw clenched. She had heard that excuse 1,000 times before, but now it sounded hollow, empty. It wasn't love, it was control. "Don't pretend, Meredith," Sarah said, taking a step forward herself. "I know exactly what you're after. The letters. Those letters are the only thing I have left of my grandmother, and you wanted them. You've wanted them for months." Meredith's eyes narrowed, but she quickly masked the emotion with a flicker of indifference. "Oh, those old things. They're not even worth much, Sarah. It's just a bunch of old family gossip. What's the big deal?" "The big deal," Sarah said, her voice rising, "is that you're willing to destroy everything for a piece of paper, for some old dispute that no one cares about anymore. You can't let go of the past, Meredith, and now you're trying to drag me into it." She took another step forward, closing the distance between them. "I'm not going to let you do this." Meredith raised an eyebrow, her composure never faltering. "Oh, and what are you going to do about it, Sarah? You think you can just waltz in here and start demanding answers? What exactly do you think you'll accomplish?" The words hit Sarah like a blow to the chest, but she didn't back down. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulling out the receipt for the duplicate key, and slapped it onto the coffee table in front of Meredith. "This," she said, her voice low and cold. "This is how you did it. You had a key made, and John, he gave it to you, didn't he?" Meredith's face remained stone cold, but Sarah could see the tiniest flicker of discomfort behind her eyes. She had been caught. "You have no proof," Meredith said, her voice dripping with venom. "You're making a fool of yourself, Sarah. This is just your imagination running wild. John would never—" "John already gave you the key, didn't he?" Sarah cut in. "You used it to break into our house. You took everything, just to keep control. You couldn't stand the thought of me having something of my own, something you couldn't touch." Meredith took a step back, her calm facade starting to crack. "You're overreacting. You've always been dramatic, Sarah, always thinking the worst of everyone around you." A sharp laugh escaped Sarah's lips. "Dramatic? Or maybe I'm the only one who can see through your games. You're not fooling anyone anymore, Meredith. Not me, not John, and certainly not yourself." Meredith opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of footsteps interrupted her. Sarah turned, her gaze falling on John, who had just entered the room. He looked pale, his eyes flicking nervously between Sarah and Meredith. Sarah's heart twisted in her chest. She had hoped for a different outcome, that maybe John would see the truth, but the look on his face told her everything she needed to know. He was still under his mother's control. "Sarah," John said, his voice hesitant. "What's going on here? Why are you acting like this? What did Meredith do now?" He looked at his mother, a mix of confusion and guilt in his eyes. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the words came out sharper than she intended. "Ask her, John. Ask your mother why she's been stealing from me. Ask her why she's been trying to destroy everything we've built." John opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah cut him off. "Don't bother defending her. She doesn't need defending. She's already done enough damage. And you, John, you gave her the key to our house. You let her invade our private space. You let her take everything, and you didn't even notice." The silence between them felt suffocating. John's face crumbled, a mixture of guilt and disbelief. He looked at Meredith, then back at Sarah, his hands trembling slightly. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I— No!" Sarah snapped, the frustration rising in her chest. "You didn't mean to, but you did it. You chose her over me. You chose to protect her, to let her destroy our lives." She shook her head, stepping back, her heart breaking all over again. "I can't do this anymore, John. I won't be part of this twisted little family anymore." Before he could respond, Sarah turned and walked toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't look back. She couldn't. As she stepped out of the house, she slammed the door shut behind her, leaving John standing in the wreckage of the life they had built together. As Sarah walked to her car, she pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed Evan's number. When he picked up, she didn't wait for pleasantries. "It's done," she said, her voice steady but filled with finality. "I've confronted them, but this isn't over yet." Evan's voice was quiet, cautious. "Are you okay? Do you need me to—" "I need you to help me make sure this is the last time," she said, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. "We're going to finish this, for good." As she started the engine, Sarah realized that everything she had been through had led to this moment. She had been betrayed, manipulated, and deceived. But now she was in control. And she wasn't about to let Meredith, or anyone, destroy her again. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel as she drove through the winding streets, the weight of the confrontation still hanging heavily on her shoulders. The events of the last few days had felt like a blur, one shocking revelation after another, each one making her question everything she had believed about her marriage and the family she had married into. As she neared Evan's apartment, the only place she felt she could think clearly, her phone buzzed. It was a text from John. The message was short, almost desperate. "Please, Sarah, let's talk. I don't want to lose you." The words stung like a slap across her face. John had always been indecisive, but this was different. She had given him every chance to make the right choice, and he had failed her. She had hoped for a fleeting moment that maybe he could change, but now she realized how naive she had been. His mother's grip on him was too strong, too suffocating for him to ever break free. She could feel the betrayal like a cold weight in her chest, the kind that never quite goes away. The apartment building loomed ahead, and Sarah's mind began to race with possibilities. She didn't know what she expected when she saw Evan, but she knew she needed him now more than ever. As she pulled into the parking lot, she noticed the familiar gray car parked in the spot next to hers. It was Evan's, of course. She had spent countless hours here, discussing everything from work projects to personal dilemmas, but tonight felt different. She wasn't just seeking advice or help. She was looking for a lifeline, a way out of the suffocating nightmare her life had become. Sarah entered the building, taking the elevator up to the second floor. The hallway was quiet, the only sound the soft echo of her footsteps. She reached Evan's door, took a deep breath, and knocked. Evan opened it almost immediately, his face softening when he saw her. His concern was evident in the way his eyes searched hers, as if trying to gauge her emotional state. "Sarah," he said quietly, stepping aside to let her in. "Are you okay? You look like you've been through hell." She gave a tight smile, but said nothing. She didn't feel okay. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at the wreckage of everything she had once held dear. But she had to keep moving forward. "I need to talk," she said finally, her voice low and strained. I need help." "Of course," Evan replied, his tone soft, but he was already moving to the kitchen, preparing a cup of coffee. As he handed it to her, he sat down across from her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You know you can talk to me about anything." Sarah nodded, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around the warm mug. She needed to focus. She needed to get everything out in the open. "I confronted Meredith," she began, her voice thick with the bitterness she was trying to suppress. And it went exactly as I thought it would. She denied everything. She played the innocent victim, but I saw it in her eyes. I know she's the one behind everything. The break-in, the stolen letters, everything. She paused, taking a sip of coffee, her eyes darting away from Evan. But it's not just her, it's John. He gave her the key. He helped her do it. I can't. I can't forgive him for that. Sarah, Evan began, his voice soft but firm. You've been through a lot. I get why you're angry. But you need to talk to him. You need to hear him out. There's always more to the story. More, Sarah repeated, her voice cracking. What more could there be? He chose her over me. He chose his mother's lies over our marriage. She stood up abruptly, pacing across the room. I gave him every chance to make it right, Evan. I was patient. I tried. But it wasn't enough. He's never going to change. Not when she's always there, manipulating him. I know, Evan said quietly, his voice tinged with sympathy. But don't do anything you'll regret. You've already been through enough, and I don't want to see you destroy yourself in the process. Meredith is dangerous, Sarah. But John, he's lost. He's been caught in her web for years. You have to decide if you want to keep fighting for him. Sarah shook her head, a sharp laugh escaping her lips. I don't know if I can fight for him anymore. I'm exhausted, Evan. I feel like I'm fighting a battle I can't win. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with unshed tears. I thought I could save him. I thought I could save us. But now, I don't know if I even recognize him anymore. The room fell into a heavy silence as Evan looked at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he stood up, walking over to where she stood. I don't want to see you lose yourself in this, Sarah, he said softly. You're stronger than this. You've always been stronger than you realize. Sarah closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. I don't feel strong. I feel broken. You're not broken, Evan replied, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. But you can't keep running away from this. You need to face it head on, even if it means making some hard decisions. And if you need someone to help you through it, you know where to find me. She looked up at him then, her heart aching, but also filled with a sense of relief. Evan was the only person she could truly trust right now, the only one who didn't have an agenda, the only one who hadn't lied to her. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what I'd do without you. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. You'll never have to find out. As Sarah sat back down on the couch, the weight of the decision she had to make settled heavily on her. She had to choose between a life of constant battle and heartbreak, or the courage to walk away. She knew that walking away from John would be the hardest thing she had ever done, but she also knew that staying with him would mean continuing to live in the shadow of his mother's control, of the lies and manipulation that had defined their relationship for too long. She had given so much of herself, but now, for the first time, she had to choose herself. The next morning, Sarah stood at the threshold of her home, the door slightly ajar, as if waiting for her to make a final decision. She had been up all night, the weight of her choice keeping her awake. As she stepped inside, she saw John sitting on the couch, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He looked like a man who had lost everything, and yet, Sarah realized, he had never really had her. He had never really chosen her. Sarah, he whispered, his voice broken. Please, let's fix this. I love you. But the words felt hollow now. They were empty promises, words he had used so many times before. You don't love me, John, Sarah replied quietly, her voice steady but full of finality. If you did, you would have never given her a key. You would have never let her control you like this. She took a step back, her heart aching but resolute. I'm done fighting for a marriage that was never really mine to begin with. John stood up, his face contorting with pain. Please, Sarah, don't leave me. I can't live without you. But it was too late. Sarah had already made her decision. "Goodbye, John," she said softly, her voice breaking as she turned and walked out the door, leaving him behind in the wreckage of their broken marriage. As she stepped into the night, she realized that this was the hardest thing she had ever done, but it was also the most freeing. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was finally free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, and the control. She had chosen herself, and that was all she needed. The sun was barely rising when Sarah walked down the quiet streets of the neighborhood she once called home. The air was crisp, tinged with the smell of fresh rain that had passed through in the early hours of the morning. Everything felt still, as if the world was holding its breath. Sarah was holding hers too. Her steps were steady, but her mind was in turmoil. The decision she had made the night before still hung heavily on her chest. She had walked away from John, from the family she had fought so hard to be a part of. But it felt like the right decision. And yet, there was no sense of victory. There was no satisfaction in finally breaking free from the chains that had bound her for so long. She just felt empty. It was a feeling she had never truly known before. Not this deep, not this profound. For the first time in years, she was alone. Truly alone. She had given so much of herself to John, to the idea of their life together, that now, without him, she didn't know who she was anymore. But this was not a time for self-pity. This was a time for action. This was the moment when she would reclaim her life, when she would fight back against everything that had sought to destroy her. And the first step was taking down Meredith. It was time to confront the woman who had caused her so much pain. It was time to expose the truth, to make sure that Meredith couldn't hide behind her manipulative facade anymore. Sarah had learned everything she needed to know. The letters, the stolen documents, the key. It was all part of a much larger game that Meredith had been playing for years. A game where the stakes were more than just family secrets. It was about power. It was about control. And Sarah had had enough. She couldn't do this alone, though. She needed to get the evidence, to make sure Meredith couldn't wriggle out of the mess she had created. That's where Evan came in. Evan had been there for her from the beginning, offering support, advice, and most importantly, his expertise. He had already helped her set up security systems, bugged Meredith's house, and installed cameras to catch her in the act. The trap was set. All Sarah had to do was walk into Meredith's lair and make sure it all came crashing down. Sarah pulled up to Meredith's house for the second time, her nerves on edge. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, but now that it was real, she could feel the weight of what was about to happen. She took a deep breath and exited the car, her heels clicking on the pavement as she approached the front door. Meredith was waiting for her, as expected. The door opened before Sarah could even ring the bell, and there Meredith stood, impeccably dressed as always, a smile that was too polished to be genuine on her lips. "Sarah?" Meredith said sweetly, but there was a hint of wariness in her voice. "I knew you'd come. What's this about now?" "Let's cut the bullshit, Meredith," Sarah replied, her voice steady, but the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "You've done enough damage. I know everything. The letters, the key, the documents. You're going to pay for this." Meredith's smile faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough for Sarah to know she had hit a nerve. "I don't know what you're talking about," Meredith said, her voice suddenly cold. She stepped back, motioning for Sarah to come in. "Why don't we sit down and talk about this?" Sarah stepped inside, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. This was the same house she had visited countless times, always feeling like an outsider. Now it felt even colder, more suffocating. Every perfectly placed object in the room seemed like part of Meredith's game, part of her illusion of control. "No," Sarah said, shaking her head. "We're not sitting down. I'm not here to talk. I'm here to end this." Meredith's eyes narrowed. "What exactly do you think you're going to do, Sarah? Do you think you can just walk in here and start throwing accusations around?" "You're not getting away with it, Meredith," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "You've been lying to everyone, manipulating John, manipulating me. You've stolen from me, you've ruined my life, and I'm done. Meredith's mask slipped for a moment, and Sarah saw something she hadn't seen before, a flash of fear. For the first time, Meredith looked like the small, powerless woman she really was, instead of the controlling, manipulative figure she portrayed. You think you know everything, Meredith said, her voice shaking. But you don't. You have no idea what's really going on. Sarah took a step closer, her eyes never leaving Meredith's face. No, I know exactly what's going on, she said, her voice steady, unwavering. I know you've been playing games with everyone, with John, with me. And I know why. You want control. You want everything. But it's over, Meredith. You're not going to ruin anyone else's life. Meredith opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say another word, the door opened behind her. Sarah turned to see John standing there, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. What's going on? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah took a deep breath. She had expected this. She had known John would come here, eventually. But she wasn't prepared for how it would feel to see him again. John, Sarah said softly, her voice cracking, I'm not here to fight with you anymore. This is between me and your mother. Dio. John looked between Sarah and Meredith, confusion and guilt written all over his face. I don't understand, he said, stepping into the room. Why are you doing this? Sarah's heart twisted, but she couldn't back down now. You never understood, John, she said, her voice steady despite the pain. You never understood how your mother's control has poisoned everything in our lives. And now it's too late. John looked like he was about to say something, but Meredith spoke first. Sarah's just upset, John, she said, her voice smooth, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. She's making a scene for no reason. Let's just go inside and talk about this. Sarah shook her head. No more talking, Meredith. No more lies. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, slamming it onto the coffee table. The papers inside were the proof. The documents she had gathered, the photos, the records, all the evidence she needed to bring Meredith down. This is it, Sarah said, her voice trembling with emotion. You've been caught. Meredith's eyes flicked to the papers, then back to Sarah, her face now drained of color. You think you can just expose me like this? Meredith asked, her voice barely a whisper. You think you've won? Sarah didn't answer her. Instead, she turned to John, whose face had gone pale. John, Sarah said softly, I tried to save us. I tried to save you. But you never really wanted to be saved. You always chose her. And now you have to live with the consequences. For a moment, no one spoke. The room was heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. Finally, John spoke, his voice broken. I didn't know, he whispered. I never knew. It doesn't matter now, Sarah said, turning to leave. You made your choice. As Sarah walked out of Meredith's house, she felt a strange sense of closure. The battle had been hard, but it was finally over. Meredith would face the consequences of her actions, and John would have to live with the fallout. Sarah had walked away from the life she had known, from the man she had loved, but she hadn't walked away defeated. She had walked away stronger, free from the chains that had bound her for so long. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more battles to fight, more wounds to heal. But for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she could breathe again. She was free, and that was all that mattered. The days following Sarah's confrontation with Meredith passed in a blur. She spent most of them in a fog, unable to focus, her thoughts consumed by the chaos she had set in motion. The battle with Meredith had been inevitable, but what followed was something she had never anticipated, feeling as though she had torn apart not only her marriage, but her very sense of self. She had walked away from John, from the life she thought she had built, and the emotional cost of that decision weighed heavily on her every waking moment. But despite everything, despite the hollow ache that lingered in her chest, Sarah knew she had done the right thing. The truth had come out, and now, Meredith's empire of lies was crumbling. The legal papers she had submitted, containing proof of Meredith's manipulation and theft, were already being processed. The police had been notified, and the investigation into Meredith's finances was already underway. But there was one more thing Sarah had to do. She had to make sure John understood the magnitude of what had happened. She had to face him one last time. She knew he would be at work that day. He was always at work. His job as a financial analyst at a prestigious firm kept him busy. But she also knew that Meredith's influence was always lurking in the background. Sarah had seen it for years. He was a man who didn't know how to stand up for himself, how to break free from the chains of his mother's control. That's why, even now, as she stood at the door of his office building, she felt a pang of regret. She had tried to help him. She had tried to save their marriage, but now she realized how much of her efforts had been in vain, how much of her love had been misplaced. The door to the building swung open as Sarah stepped inside. She gave a nod to the security guard, who didn't even look up from his desk. She had been here countless times before, always the supportive wife, always standing by John's side as he worked long hours. She had grown accustomed to the silence that followed him around, the way he buried himself in his work to avoid confrontation. But today was different. Today, she was walking in with the purpose of finally putting an end to the chapter of her life that had been marked by lies and manipulation. She was here to confront John, to make him face the truth of his own actions. As Sarah walked down the long hallway, she felt her heart pounding in her chest. She had to remain strong. She had to keep her emotions in check. This was the final confrontation, the one she had been putting off for far too long. She reached his office, the door slightly ajar. She knocked softly, but there was no response. She pushed it open, stepping into the quiet room. John was sitting at his desk, his back turned to her, his attention focused on the screen in front of him. He didn't even notice her presence at first, as if he was still caught in the world of numbers and spreadsheets that had consumed him for so long. Sarah hesitated for a moment, but then she walked forward, standing in front of his desk. "John," she said, her voice calm but firm. He looked up, startled to see her standing there. His face softened when he saw her, but there was a tension in his expression, a wariness that hadn't been there before. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't expect to see you here." She didn't sit down. She couldn't. Not yet. Instead, she crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "I've had enough of the games, John. I've had enough of the lies." John looked away, his eyes drifting to the floor. "Sarah, I know I've made mistakes. I know I haven't been the husband I promised to be, but please, just hear me out. I'm trying to fix things." "Fix things?" Sarah repeated, her voice rising. "It's too late for that, John. You've had every opportunity to make things right, but you've chosen to stay under her thumb, to let your mother control everything. You chose her over me. You chose her over our marriage." The words felt like a punch in the gut, but they were the truth, and Sarah wasn't going to hide from the truth anymore. I didn't choose her," John said quickly, his voice breaking. "I didn't want this. I swear to you, I didn't." "Then why did you give her the key, John?" Sarah's voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "Why did you let her invade our home? Why did you stand by and do nothing while she stole from me, manipulated me, and destroyed everything we had?" John was silent for a long moment, his face clouded with guilt. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice soft and trembling. "I was scared. I've always been scared of her. She has this hold on me that I can't explain. She's always had it." Sarah's heart wavered, a mix of pity and frustration rising within her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that he had been a victim too. But the truth was, he had chosen his path. He had chosen to stay weak, to stay trapped in a toxic cycle with his mother. "John," Sarah said quietly, "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep fighting for something that's already broken. You had your chance, and you blew it." He reached for her hand, his grip desperate. "Sarah, please," he said, his voice pleading. I love you. Don't leave me. But Sarah pulled away from him, her resolve hardening. You don't love me, John. Not the way I need, not the way I deserve. She turned to leave, but as she reached the door, she paused. This is the last time, John. I'm done. You'll have to face the consequences of your choices. With that, she walked out of his office, out of his life for good. As Sarah stepped out of the building, the weight that had been crushing her chest for so long seemed to lift. The anger, the heartbreak, the uncertainty, they were all fading away, replaced with something that felt foreign but liberating: peace. She didn't feel victorious. There was no sense of triumph in her heart. There was only a quiet acceptance of the truth. She had done everything she could. She had fought for love, for her marriage, for the life she thought she deserved. But now she was finally free. Free from the lies, free from the manipulation, free from the constant tug-of-war between love and betrayal. The world stretched out before her, vast and unknown, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel afraid. She felt alive. As Sarah walked away from the building, she didn't look back. She knew that her future was waiting for her, a future she could build on her own terms, without the shadow of her past looming over her. It was a future filled with endless possibilities. She didn't need anyone else to validate her worth anymore. She had finally found herself, and that was all she needed. It had been a few weeks since Sarah had walked away from her marriage, from John, from the toxic grip of Meredith's manipulation. The aftermath of the confrontation had left her emotionally exhausted, but there was a strange peace that came with knowing she had done the right thing. She had spent those days reflecting, organizing her thoughts, and figuring out how to rebuild her life. The legal proceedings were moving forward, and Meredith was finally facing the consequences of her actions. But as Sarah looked out the window of her apartment that morning, the weight of the situation still hung over her. She had won the battle against Meredith, but in doing so, she had lost something far more personal: her sense of family, her sense of belonging. The realization hit her harder than she expected. She had put so much of herself into saving a marriage that was never meant to be. In her fight to protect the man she loved, she had lost herself, but she wasn't going to dwell on that. Not anymore. She had made a choice, and now it was time to face the next step. Evan had been her rock throughout the past few weeks, offering a listening ear, helping her navigate the complexities of the legal process, and reminding her of her strength. But now, as she prepared for the next phase, she needed to do something for herself. She had decided to take a few days off from the chaos and go somewhere peaceful, somewhere she could think, reflect, and recharge. As Sarah packed her things, she thought about the road ahead. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer going to allow anyone to dictate her life. She was done being a pawn in someone else's game. After a long drive through the countryside, Sarah arrived at the small cottage she had rented for the weekend. It was nestled near a quiet lake, far away from the noise of the city, and surrounded by nature's calm embrace. The air smelled fresh, the trees whispered in the breeze, and the water glistened under the sun. It was the perfect place to breathe, to find solace, and to reconnect with the person she used to be before everything went wrong. She took a deep breath, stepping out of her car and stretching her arms toward the sky. This was what she needed: a break from the world. But just as Sarah was beginning to feel a sense of peace, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She sighed, half expecting it to be a call from Evan or her lawyer. But when she saw the name on the screen, her stomach sank. It was John. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Sarah." John's voice came through the phone, shaky and full of regret. "I need to see you. Please, can we talk?" She closed her eyes for a moment, her fingers tightening around the phone. She had known this was coming. She had known he would eventually reach out. But now, as she heard the desperation in his voice, she realized that she wasn't ready. Not yet. "I'm not sure what there is left to talk about, John," she replied, her voice calm, but with a quiet edge. "You made your choices, and I made mine. I can't keep going in circles with you." "Please, Sarah." John continued, his voice breaking. I know I screwed up. I know I've hurt you. But I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just want to explain. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. Part of her wanted to hear him out, to understand why he had done what he did, but another part of her knew that no explanation could undo the damage. I don't need your explanation anymore, John. I need to move on. I need to find peace, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I understand, John finally said, his voice soft, almost resigned. But please, just know that I still love you. I always have. The words hung in the air like a bitter echo, and for a moment, Sarah felt the familiar pang of longing, of the love that had once felt so real. But she pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to fall back into that cycle. Goodbye, John, she said quietly before ending the call. As she sat in the quiet of the cottage, Sarah let out a deep breath. It was over. The chapter with John, with his family, with everything that had weighed her down for so long, had come to an end. But there was no sense of relief, only an empty feeling that seemed to stretch out before her. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself sitting by the lake, watching the sun set over the water. The stillness of the moment felt like a balm to her aching soul, but she knew that it wasn't enough. She needed to face what had been left behind. The bitterness, the anger, the feelings of betrayal that had been festering beneath the surface. She couldn't move forward until she dealt with them. The following morning, Sarah decided to take a walk around the lake to clear her head. She was lost in her thoughts when she heard a voice behind her. I didn't expect to see you here. Sarah turned to see Evan standing there, his hands in his pockets, a look of concern on his face. Evan, she said, surprised but relieved to see him. What are you doing here? He shrugged. I figured you could use some company. Plus, I know this is what you need. A little time to yourself. But you also need to face what's happened. You can't keep running from it. Sarah looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. He had always been there, always understanding, always patient with her. I don't know what to do next, she admitted, her voice small. I thought I would feel better after everything, but it just feels like I'm stuck. Evan stepped closer, his gaze soft but steady. It's not about feeling better right now. It's about giving yourself the time and space to heal. You've been through a lot. You've given so much, and now you need to give something to yourself. She nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I just don't know how to let go of everything, of the past, of the pain. You don't have to let go all at once, Evan said gently. It's a process, but you're already doing it. You walked away from a life that wasn't serving you. That's the hardest part. Sarah smiled softly, grateful for his unwavering support. Thank you, she said quietly. I don't know where I'd be without you. You'd be fine, he said with a smile. But you're not alone. You never will be. As they stood there by the lake, the world felt a little bit brighter, a little bit easier to face. Sarah didn't have all the answers, and she wasn't sure what the future held. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on the right path. It wasn't about revenge, about getting back at those who had wronged her. It was about reclaiming her life, about finding herself again. And with Evan by her side, she knew she wasn't walking this path alone. She could do this. She would do this. The past might have shaped her, but it wouldn't define her anymore. As the sun set behind them, Sarah felt the first true sense of peace she had known in months. The journey was far from over, but it was a journey she was finally ready to take on her own terms. And that was all that mattered. The early morning light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the quiet park. Sarah sat on a bench, her hands resting in her lap, watching the calm water of the river flow gently by. It had been a month since she had left John and Meredith behind. A month since she had made the hardest decision of her life. Yet, as she sat there, she couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. The pain had dulled, but the absence of the life she had once dreamed of still lingered in her chest. The journey of self-discovery, the quest for peace, had been harder than she ever imagined. But it was a journey that was far from over. Sarah had come to realize that the most difficult part of moving forward wasn't about leaving the past behind. It was about understanding it, accepting it, and using it to rebuild herself. But no matter how many times she tried to bury it, there was always that lingering doubt. What if she had made the wrong choice? What if, somehow, there was a way to fix everything? A voice broke her reverie, pulling her back into the present. "Sarah," the voice said gently. She looked up to see Evan standing in front of her, his expression kind, yet knowing. "You've been here for a while, haven't you?" Sarah nodded. "Just thinking." "I thought you might need some company," Evan said, sitting down next to her. There was a pause as he studied her face, his eyes soft with concern. "How are you really doing?" Sarah let out a small sigh, her gaze returning to the water. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I thought I would feel better by now, but there are moments when the doubt creeps in, when I wonder if I made the right choice, if maybe there was another way to handle everything." Evan gave a small smile, his voice steady. "It's normal to feel that way, Sarah, but you have to remember, leaving wasn't a weakness, it was a decision that took strength, one that most people never find the courage to make." Sarah glanced at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "But what if I could have fixed things? What if John? What if I could have helped him change? Maybe he's not entirely to blame. Maybe I should have tried harder." Evan shook his head slowly. "You did everything you could, Sarah. You fought for that marriage. You fought for someone who wasn't willing to fight for himself. And sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we can't change others." Sarah looked away, her eyes stinging with the sting of tears. "It's just, I don't know who I am anymore. I've spent so many years trying to make everyone else happy, John, Meredith, even my own family, thinking that if I just gave enough of myself, everything would work out. But now, I feel like I've lost my identity. Like I don't even know who I am without all that." Evan's voice softened, his gaze never leaving hers. "You are not the person you were before. You're not the person who stayed silent, who let others control you. You're stronger now, Sarah. You've learned that your worth isn't defined by anyone but you." There was a long silence between them, as Sarah took in his words. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope, a small, quiet spark that had been buried beneath the weight of everything. "But I don't know what to do next," Sarah murmured. "I feel lost. Like there's this huge void inside me that I can't fill." "It's okay to feel lost," Evan said, his voice gentle. "It's part of the process. You're still figuring it out. And you don't have to have all the answers right now. Take it one day at a time. You're not alone in this." Sarah looked up at him, meeting his eyes, and for the first time, she saw something else, something she hadn't expected. There was tenderness in his gaze, something that made her heart race. She felt the unspoken connection between them, the bond they had built over the past weeks. It was more than just friendship. She had been so focused on the pain of her past, so consumed by the hurt and betrayal, that she hadn't noticed how Evan had quietly been there for her, supporting her, helping her heal. As the silence stretched on, Sarah realized something she hadn't fully understood until now. She wasn't broken. She wasn't lost. She was rebuilding piece by piece. And with Evan by her side, she was starting to see that maybe, just maybe, there was something more waiting for her. Something worth fighting for. "I think I'm ready to move forward," Sarah said softly, her voice filled with newfound strength. "I'm ready to stop looking back and start looking ahead." Evan smiled, his expression warm. "That's the first step, and no matter what happens, I'm here for you." Just as she thought she might be ready to say something more, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the message. It was from her lawyer, informing her that the charges against Meredith had been officially filed. The investigation was now in full swing. Meredith would finally face the consequences for everything she had done. A wave of relief washed over Sarah, but it was tempered by something else, something that felt like closure. This chapter of her life, the one that had been marked by deceit, manipulation, and heartache, was finally coming to an end. And now, Sarah was free to write her own story. "It's over," Sarah whispered, the words feeling like a weight lifting from her chest. Evan turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "Is it?" he asked softly. "Is it really over?" Sarah paused for a moment, contemplating the question. Was it really over? Meredith would face justice, yes, but would Sarah ever truly be free from the scars of the past? The answer came to her, clear and unwavering. "Yes," she said with a quiet finality. "It's over, and I'm ready for whatever comes next." As they sat together in silence, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the lake. The world felt a little less heavy now, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt the weight of the past lifting from her shoulders. She was no longer defined by her past mistakes, her past heartaches. She was her own person, and that was enough. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more emotional tales of resilience and personal growth, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest videos, filled with heartwarming and inspiring stories just like this one. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more powerful journeys with you. So, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us for the next chapter. Thank you for being part of our community, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.